The default size of a slideshow in Pictures-to-Exe is 1920 pixels by 1080, which is an aspect ratio of 16:9. That size and aspect ratio will be the perfect size for PC screens, laptops, televisions and projectors. It's the size that fits perfectly with MP4 videos and our uploads to YouTube. So it makes perfect sense for us to create our images at the same size as the slideshow we intend to make, 1920 pixels by 1080. Now the aspect ratio and size I've just been talking about is perfect if we're going to make a static slideshow. In other words, a slideshow without animation. But of course, that is the subject of this group of videos. I've opened up the Objects and Animation screen here, and I've got a picture which has been created perfectly at 1920 by 1080. If I just click and drag to move it just for a moment, the shape we can see behind, of course, reflects the size of the slideshow we've set up. Again, 1920 1080, 16:9 aspect ratio. I'm going to hit Ctrl Z because the image being exactly the same size, it fits perfectly. Now the problem we're discussing here is I don't have a big enough image here to be able to gently pan this image left to right, for example, or maybe zoom in or out. Pictures-to-Exe does have a setting over in the animation section here. It's in this little hyperlink in the zoom section. If I click that, I can reset any image to the original size I created it, and this may have been done in an external image editor. But when I click this here, of course nothing happens to the picture at all, because this picture was created at the same size as the slideshow. So I can't make this picture any bigger. Physically I can, but of course we're looking at this picture fairly small in the center here, when the slideshow is viewed on a large flat screen monitor. We're going to start to eat into the quality of the image because we've made the image much bigger than it really should be. So with animation in mind, a question we may want to ask is how many pixels over the standard 1920 1080 do I need to be able to give this image a gentle pan, let's say from left to right, or in fact we could zoom gently in or out. Now in fact we don't need that many more pixels than the 1920 1080. A few hundred will probably do the job. The problem is when we're putting a slideshow together, we're not entirely sure how many we're going to need. So what I'm going to suggest is we standardize on a file size of 2560 pixels by 1440 pixels. If I go to the top right of the screen here, I'm going to click the little arrow to take me to the next image, because this image was created at those values. Now it happens to be 16:9, the same as the preceding one, but this one has extra pixels, so we've got the opportunity here to pan it or zoom it. Now if I go to that little hyperlink I showed you a few moments ago, and I now click the original size, now we can see something a little different. In fact, I could do with just temporarily reducing the size of the screen, because now you can see the solid picture reflects the size of our slideshow, which remains 1920 1080, but now we've got a much bigger image. So I could decide to zoom this picture out, in, or I can pan it without any loss of quality. Now of course we can use images straight from our digital camera and not worry about file size at all, and many authors do this. However, we may want to ensure that any animation we create in our slideshow not only plays well on our computer, but also on others that may be far older than ours and therefore far less powerful. Whether you decide to follow my way of working, which involves a little more work but not an awful lot, or dispense with any reduction in image size and use images straight from your camera, is a personal choice. Let me end this section by just showing you how much overkill there is if we use a 20 megapixel image, a typical image from, let's say, a Canon 5D camera. If we use that image untouched in a slideshow as opposed to one created at 2560 pixels by 1440, and we're looking at a large image on screen at the moment. You can also see it's a slightly different aspect ratio because the images we get from a typical digital SLR are going to be 3:2. The slideshow we're making is 16:9. The difference here is going to be massive, so before I even go and click the original file size over in the animation tab, I'm going to reduce this right down to 10%, I think, just in case it goes off the screen. So here we go. Well, not quite off the screen. Let's see if we can creep up to 25%. I can't. You can see the overkill is too big even for that. So let me drop back to 10%. So this area here will reflect 1920 pixels by 1080, but I will be loading my slideshow with all of these pixels, which really we're never going to use. Imagine doing that with 30, 40 or 50 images, and how that's going to impact on the size of your slideshow, and very likely how that slideshow is going to play on other people's computers. So coming back into the slide list, we can see that the first slide here is 1920 by 1080, and clearly that particular slide would be no good for animation. If I just use my arrow keys to the right of my keyboard, I'm going to skip to the next image, and if you look at the pixel value there, this is what we're going to be using to demonstrate a gentle pan and a gentle zoom. We've got those extra few hundred pixels on the height and the width, but we don't need the colossal values we can see here. It's just a waste, overkill.